Hallo und herzlich willkommen zu einer weiteren Folge Tell Me Why zusammen mit Let's Cody.
Hallo.
Heute mit dem letzten Teil der Goblin-Geschichten. The Pelican Forgives the Goblins. Once upon a time, in a deep and ancient forest, there lived a pair of crafty goblins in a cave below a big wooden house. They lived with a wise princess who shared as much food with them as she was able, but it was never quite enough. This left the goblins hungry. Very hungry. Always hungry. One day, as they were out foraging for food, the pious pelican landed on a rock and dumped a smorgasbord from her beak, which the goblins knew was magic and never emptied. There were king crabs in red, blue, gold, and scarlet, veiny blue shrimp, pink-shelled scallops, oblong brown clams, purple spiny urchins, and even one prickly red sea cucumber. Cucumber. The food just kept coming. They watched as the pelican ate one clam and then took a nap. Do we think she would mind if we took just a little? Asked one goblin to the other. A beak never empties. Was?
Ist wieder was überklebt.
Ja, vielleicht wurde die Geschichte geändert. Dum, dum, dum.
Okay.
Her beak never empties. She won't possibly miss a couple of crabs, said the second, licking her lips. They were agreed, and so they crept over, pilched some crabs, and ran. The goblins scarfed the crabs, but when they finished, they found that they were still hungry. She won't miss a handful of shrimp, said one goblin to the other. The goblins scarfed the shrimp, but when they finished, they found that they were still hungry. Maybe also a few scallops, said one goblin to the other. The goblins scarfed the scallops, but when they were finished, they found they were still hungry. So they went back for clams, and then urchins, and finally even the sea cucumber. Finally, they were not hungry, but there was also nothing left. Just then the pelican woke up. What happened to my food? She asked. Unable to lie about it, the goblins confessed their crime. The pelican was dismayed, but she was a charitable-hearted bird, and she could tell the crafty goblins were growing little creatures. Goblins, said the pious pelican, I will share my food with you, but you must in return follow my example and be as generous with others as I am with you. Take that to heart and will have considered your debt paid. But we have nothing to give, said the goblins. You have your nimble hands and your crafty brains and your loving hearts, said the pelican.
Gib alles.
Alles. The crafty goblins realized how much they had to give, and for the rest of the day they looked for ways to help the other creatures of the forest. They found the stalwart moose struggling with an itchy, hard-to-reach spot on his back, and so they climbed up and gave it a good scratching. Next, they helped the old bear, could not get the honey out of a narrow beehive. They climbed up to the top of a tree with the hive, and then dropped it, cracking it open. Finally, they found the princess crying over a loss she would not speak about. So they wrapped their little arms around her in a great big hug and stayed until she felt better. Die haben die Bienen getötet oder was?
Ja.
When they were done, they returned to the pious pelican. Did it feel good being generous as I am? Asked the pelican. It did, said the goblins. I'm glad, said the pelican. We all have problems that we can't solve on our own, but if everyone goes about with generosity in their hearts, then there's always someone on hand to help. But we all must commit to do so, or there may be no one there to help you when you need it. This made sense to the goblins, and they thanked the pious pelican for her food and the lesson. Of course, by this time, they were hungry again, and that remained an ongoing problem until that day the stalwart moose taught them to fish. But that is another story. And that is how the pious pelican forgave the crafty goblins, and how she taught them charity.
Schön.
Nice.
The Goblins meet the Ice Troll.
Muss ich daran denken, wie wir beide gegen den Yeti bei der Minecraft gekämpft haben.
Das war schön.
Rumgeworfen zu werden wie ein scheiß Ball, Alter.
Once upon a time, in an ancient and deep forest,
Yes.
the crafty goblins were awake long after they should have been asleep. One goblin said to the other, "Let's go explore the forest." Now the goblins were not in the habit of exploring the forest late at night, and they did not know what they would find. But this did not scare them off. They crept
You-
out of their beds, bundled up, and went exploring. It was dark. The light of the moon was just enough to keep them from walking into trees, but they could not see more than 15 feet in front of them. Every time a twig snapped or branches rattled, they considered turning back, but they didn't. And so they had ventured far beyond the house into a part of the forest they were not familiar with. When they realized the snapping of twigs and rattling of branches had become steady, something was following them. They turned to run, but a hulking figure emerged from the darkness, sweeping them up with a giant hand and stuffing them into a burlap sack. The goblins wiggled and tried and cried out, but the sack remained shut, and their captor stomped through the forest, singing "Whittle diddle dum, whittle diddle dee. In this bag's a meal for me."
Oh, Digga.
After a lot of dumping and faddling, the bag opened, and the goblins were dumped into a giant iron pot full of warming water. A huge troll stood overhead, grinning down at them through long, bushy white eyebrows. "I am the ice troll, and you are my dinner."
Nice.
He heated? Keine Ahnung.
You ready to cook the goblins?
Ready? Doch ready. Das ist kein Wort. He readied to cook the goblins, singing "Whittle diddle dum, dum dee dum dee dee. There's soon to be a soup for me." Finishing his ditty, he bent over to stoke the fire beneath the pot and let out a loud noise of pain, rubbing a spot on his bark that always edged
Back.
Yes?
On his back.
Back. That always edged. The troll stood painfully and walked over to a stone shelf, where he began to chop potatoes. One of the goblins had an idea. She whispered to her brother, "Follow my lead." The goblin stretched out in the water, floating and letting out sighs of contentment. "Ah," said one of the goblins, "this is the most relaxed I've ever been. My body feels so good, I think I could run 100 miles without stopping," said the second. The troll peered at them. They weren't supposed to be happy about being in the cookpot, but they certainly looked like they were. Troll, said the goblins. "If your back is hurting, you should try sitting in the water, just for a little bit, before it gets too hot." The troll stomped over. "But if I take you out, then you will escape, and there would be no soup for me." "Put us back in the sack," suggested the goblins. "Then we can't run away." This made sense to the troll. The spot of his back that always etched was still bothering him, and the goblins couldn't go anywhere if they were trapped. So he stuffed the goblins back in his sack and climbed into the soup pot. He stretched out and let out a sigh of contentment. Meanwhile, the goblins threw themselves around his sack until he began to swing. The troll was so relaxed he didn't even notice. The bag dropped onto the shelf where the troll had been chopping potatoes, and the goblins pushed it up against the edge of the troll's knife, sawing a hole. Then they made a break for it. The troll finally noticed what they were doing and roared out in anger. But he was so relaxed that when he tried to chase them, he tumbled out of the cookpot and into the flames, catching his bushy eyebrows on fire. The goblins ran and ran and ran as fast as they could through the ancient and deep forest, until they were back in their cave and safe in their beds. They vowed never to venture out in the ancient and deep forest late at night again, for they did not think they'd get so lucky as to trick the ice troll twice. And that is the story how the crafty goblins met the ice troll and why they were never did again.
Nice. Dumme Troll.
Schön.
Schön, wie sie da nur am Tricksen sind.
So.
So, the goblins tricked the muskrat. Once upon a time in a deep and ancient wood. Oh my god. There lived a muskrat. The muskrat was a lazy, cowardly creature who did little but lay around in the sun, cleaning his beautiful coat until it shone. One day, the muskrat found the crafty goblins playing king of the mountain on his favorite rock. He was too cowardly to confront them directly, and so he retreated to a safe distance and then pitched a stone right at a hornet's nest, hanging overhead. Digga. One of the goblins saw him do it, but before she could say anything, the hornets emerged furious and chased the goblins away, stinging them. With the rock empty, the muskrat claimed his spot. When the goblins returned, they asked the muskrat, "Why did you do that?" "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, turning away to ignore them. The goblins knew that the muskrat cared for nothing but the coat, so they devised to steal it in order to teach him a lesson. As the muskrat lay in the sun, he spied the goblins strutting by. Their skin was covered in flecks of gold. "Goblins," said the muskrat, "what happened to make your skin shiny that way?" "When we were attacked by the hornets, we ran and ran until we found a pool by the glacier. We dove in and then came out this way." "Would you show me this pool?" asked the muskrat. The crafty goblins led the muskrat to a pool. The muskrat looked at the pool skeptically. "It looks like a pool," he said. The goblins chuckled and shrugged. "You don't have to jump in if you don't want to, but what do you lose if you try? And if it works, why, you will be the most beautiful creature in the whole of the forest." With visions of his splendid coat in mind, the muskrat jumped in. When he emerged, he was disappointed to find nothing had changed. Said one goblin. "Maybe you have to be stung by the hornets first, just like us." The muskrat hesitated, because getting stung would be painful. Seeing his hesitation, the goblins added, "If it works, you will be the most beautiful creature in the whole of the forest." The muskrat decided it was worth it, so returned to the hornet's nest and pitched a stone right at it. The hornets emerged even more furious this time. They chased the muskrat, stinging him repeatedly, until he jumped into the magic pool. The muskrat was disappointed to find that once again nothing had changed. "I wonder if the magic only works for us," said one of the goblins. "Would you like me to jump in with your coat?" The muskrat hesitated. "If it works, you'll be the most beautiful creature in the whole of the forest." With visions of his splendid coat in mind, the muskrat agreed. He slipped it off and headed to the goblins. Without his coat, the muskrat was pale and covered in scabbing welts. Instead of jumping in the pool, one of the goblins ran away with the coat, laughing. The other pushed Muskrat into the frigid pool, and as water splashed the goblin, the gold freaks ran, revealing that they had only ever been painted on. The Muskrat cried so pitifully amid such a clamor that he awoke the Ice King, who came down to the forest to see what had happened. When the Ice King saw the Muskrat, he laughed, only further infuriating the creature. "Tell me what happened," said the Ice King. Both the Muskrat and the goblins told their sides of the story, and the Ice King considered the case before him. "It is true that the Muskrat is vain, and he thinks of nothing but himself," concluded the Ice King. "But he needs something to keep him warm in the water and the snow." So the Ice King was decided. The Muskrat would get his coat back, but it would be patchy and unkempt. After that day, he became known as Mangy Muskrat. And that is how the goblins tricked the Muskrat into giving up his coat and how he got his name. Huh.
Let's go!
Let's go.
The moose teaches the goblins. Once upon a time, in a deep and ancient forest, the crafty goblins were hungry. This wasn't
Unusual.
unusual. Ich hätte nie rausgekannt. The goblins were always hungry, but today they were patiently, particularly, doch fuck, hungry. They opened the White Prince's. Wolf? Was? Alter.
Cupboards.
Cupboards. Alter, ja, das könnte bei mir ein E und N sein. Also es ist. Oh. To look for a snack, but all she had was a small pile of nuts and berries, and just one strip of dried fish. The goblins grabbed it all and gobbled it up. But they were still hungry. They went out into the woods to look for more to eat. First, they dropped by the small ponds. The big frog was asleep, and beside the pond was a pile of insects she had caught for eating after she woke up. The goblins crept up to the pile, careful not to wake the big frog. As they got close, she riveted loudly, and they froze. But the big frog kept sleeping, so they grabbed up the pile of insects and gobbled it up. But they were still hungry. As they crept back into the woods, they found stalwart moose watching them. Did you just steal the big frog's food?
Dum, dum, dum.
The goblins tried not to look guilty, but failed. She said we could have them, they cried. Oh, really? Asked the moose. Let's ask her. So Moose woke up Big Frog and asked, Did you say the goblins could have your food? The big frog looked at the goblins, who she knew were always hungry, and nodded. Yes, I did. Really? Asked the moose, surprised. Frog nodded, and the moose sighed. All right then, he said, and he had to let the goblins go. The next stop was the river. They watched as Old Bear swiped up a leaping salmon, catching it deftly?
Jo. Oh, ich hab mich verschluckt.
Gott, was sind das für Wörter? In his large paws. He laid out upon a rock and left it to dry, lumbering into the woods to seek out some berries. The crafty goblins crept up to the rock, carefully in case the old bear returns. They reached the rocks, grabbed the salmon, and gobbled it all up. But they were still hungry. As they crept back into the woods, the stalwart moose was once again waiting for them. Are you going to tell me Old Bear said you could have that? Yes, replied the goblins. Old Bear ambled up at the moment the moose asked him. Did you leave that fish for the goblins? Old Bear looked at the goblins, who he knew were always hungry, and nodded. I did, he said. Really? Asked the moose. Really, said the bear. After Moose left, Old Bear said to the goblins, be sure to tell the princess I was kind to you, and don't steal my fish again. The goblins, still hungry, went out looking for one more meal. They crept up to the mangy muskrat's lodge and began to climb inside when they were dragged right back out. The stalwart moose dangled them by the by the sea nee, by the seals?
Dangle them by
Okay,
the
then.
seats.
Seeds.
Seats of the
Of the-
pants.
Wenn ich weitergelesen hätte. By the seats of the pants and said, now I know Mangy Muskrat didn't tell you that you could eat his fruit, because he blames you for his coat being ruined. Besides, he barely has enough. Besides, he has barely for himself. He barely has enough for himself and doesn't share with anyone. The goblins began to protest, but he shook his head. He set the goblins down and said, come with me. The goblins followed the stalwart moose to a part of the river, where it ran slow enough for them to walk into it safely. He gave them each a fishing line and said, I am going to teach you to fish, so that when you are hungry, you don't need to steal from the animals of the forest. It will be hard work, but it will be honest. Crafty goblins were not against working hard. They were just hungry. And so they listened to Moose and soon pulled a wiggling fish out of the river. They ate them up, and finally they were no longer hungry. And that is how the moose came to teach the crafty goblins to fish.
Nett von dem Hund.
Das ist ein Moose, kein Hund.
Oh. Oh. The Mad Hunter gets his hand back. Das könnte interessant werden.
Oh, und schon schließt sich der Kreis.
Once upon a time, in a deep and cold lake near the ancient forest, there lived an old seal who was a powerful witch. After angering the Ice King, she had been bound to the lake, allowed only to venture out when the moon was full. Only looking like the hag she truly was. For years she dreamed of vengeance, all alone within the deep lake among the corpses of her many previous victims. One night she woke to see a black and hooded silhouette clawing to reach a beautiful gown full of stone. Ich dachte, der hat die Kleidung abgelegt.
Nee, der ist tot.
Nice. The human had delved far deeper to the lake than any land dweller should have been able to go. His tenacity and furiousness impressed the moon hag, and she decided he would be wasted in a statuary of corpses. She used her magic to enspell him, allowing him to breathe underwater, but also binding him to her service. You, she said, will be the instrument of my release and my revenge, for you and I together will kill the Ice King. The moon hag had never heard of the Mad Hunter, and she did not know the power he wielded. She could only tell he was a hunter, and her lust for revenge blinded her to the threat he posed. She gifted him a hand of ice, which was not as nimble as the hand of flesh, but allowed him to serve her better than no hand at all. The moon hag spent years devising the perfect plan to kill the Ice King, and years more moving all the pieces into place to execute it. In the meantime, the Mad Hunter served her, guarding her chest of treasures and plotting his own plots. Finally, everything was prepared. The The full moon rose and the moon hag stepped on land. Giddy at the thought she would never have to leave again if it did not please her. She brought the mad hunter to his post, a checked peak of ice and stone from which she would loose the arrow that would slay the Ice King. Before she could go, he put forward a proposal. Moonhag, said the hunter, if you grow back my missing hand, I would be certain to hit the Ice King with my arrow. You will have only one shot, and I would hate to miss. You are powerful witch, so will be able to craft ties to bind me to this place that I cannot break. The Moonhag considered it. Alright, I will grow back your hand and then bind you here with ties that will not break. She cast a spell, and the Mad Hunter's hand of ice was replaced with a hand of flesh. As the witch left to complete the next part of her plan, the Mad Hunter grinned wickedly in the moonlight. After a short time, the Moonhag returned, luring the Ice King into the Mad Hunter's line of sight. What is this about, Moonhag? Asked the Ice King. Many a long year have you bound me to the lake. Oh, many a long year have you bound me to the lake, said the Moonhag. Many a long year have I been alone in the dark. That ends tonight. She cast a powerful spell that made the Ice King slow to react, and then gave the signal. Mad Hunter, she cried. Let your arrow fly. Nothing happened. She twitched nervously. Mad Hunter, she roared. Let your arrow fly. Still nothing happened. The Ice King meanwhile was striding toward her, slow but furious. The Moonhag had fled, running first to the checked peak of ice and stone where a servant should have waited. But the peak was empty. The ties had been broken and the Mad Hunter was gone. For in the end, he was the more powerful of the two, especially once he had two hands. When the Ice King finally caught the hag, his furious voice could be heard throughout the forest. For your wickedness, you will be eternally bound to the lake. You will no longer be allowed to leave, not even under full moon. The Moonhag was imprisoned in the lake, and she never again tried to escape. Now this is how the Mad Hunter escaped the Moon's hag. Now he got his left hand back. Das war's? Krass.
Das nenne ich doch mal ein Happy End.
Ein gutes, altes Happy End. Gut, dann würde ich sagen, war's das mit der Folge. Lasst ein Like und ein Abo, wenn es euch gefallen hat. In der nächsten Folge geht es endlich weiter mit der Story und den komischen Typen. Gesundheit. Schaut beim nächsten Mal vorbei und tschüss.
Tschüss.